Hello everyone, Master Xeon1001 here, and in this video I'm excited to announce the release of Boxcutter 718_11. For this one, quite a bit of work went into it, even though through the examples I keep it relatively simple. The main thing is that Custom Cutter now finally has its counterpart mode of having a one-to-one mode. So the goal with Custom Cutter with me is definitely to draw shapes exactly as I recalled them or extracted them. And so we definitely wanted to resolve that for this particular update. We also did a small update with recall, updating it to dimensional recall, where now you can recall shapes with absolute dimensions. But also, whenever it comes to flipping a shape, it's now easier than ever. In Boxcutter previously, there was a system in place that would keep shapes oriented the same way no matter which way you drag the draw dot, which always drove me crazy. So without further ado, let's jump into what's going on with this latest update, and I hope users enjoy. New to 718.11 is the ability to press Ctrl R to rotate your shape. So if we draw a shape and we extrude it, we can press Tab to pause it. If we press Ctrl R, we're now able to rotate the shape 90 degrees just off the bat. So sometimes you just need to rotate your shape 90 degrees. Now that option is available. So if we press D and we switch over to Custom Cutter and we draw a custom box and we just extrude it and then tab to live, we could press Ctrl R and see that the shape is rotated. However, if we grab the draw dot and we make the shape something a little more rectangular, when we press Ctrl R, you can actually see in action the difference between rotating the shape 90 degrees and pressing Shift R, which will rotate the shape inside 90 degrees. So Ctrl R is intended to be an assistant for rotate inside to make your life a little easier. Sometimes you want to keep the uniformity of your shape, but absolutely rotate it 90 degrees to get it oriented exactly where you need it. So here I am in the 2.83 LTS, where I'm currently using an older version of Boxcutter 718.7, and for this I can demonstrate by pressing D and jumping into N-gon a particular issue I've always had with N-gon. So here we are just drawing our shape, everything's fine, and then we just double click on this point to jump to extrude. If we press Shift or if we press Tab in order to pause the shape, we can grab this draw dot and begin modifying the shape, which is great. But if we hold Shift, we are now constrained to basically box rolls of keeping this shape one-to-one with keeping it a box formation, but we're not able to actually get the N-gon shape back to the original shape, which was something like that. So that's something that always bothered me, because converting an N-gon to a box has never been my desire. The ability to scale it freely and actually keep control over the particular dimensions that were specified when I drew it are actually more important. So if we just right click to cancel and we minimize and go back over to the current version of Boxcutter 718.11, we could press D, jump over to N-gon, and then if we begin drawing our shape, we're just creating a very quick basic shape. Double clicking on this last point to jump to extrude, we can press Tab to pause it, and then when we grab the draw dot to begin maneuvering it, we're able to maneuver it freely, of course. But if we want to get back the original dimensions, we can just hold Shift and get back the original dimensions of this shape without having to have it jump to a box formation. So this is a change that I've wanted for a very long time, just so I can be a little bit more free whenever it comes to N-gon. So just know that now there's one-to-one draw support on the draw dot when it comes to N-gon. So for this example, let's create some shapes worth recalling. So I'm going to Shift A, add a curve, and we're just going to create a curved circle, move it over on the Y. We'll tab into edit mode, press V to change all the handles to vector, and then using HardOps, we'll just go into Control tilde, set our shape to be 2D, set our fill mode to be both, and then from here we can just extrude it, and that makes for a very strange box whenever it comes to using curves. However, after you rotate it 45 degrees, it actually looks a lot more normal, and you can actually duplicate shapes on the inside and it'll kind of automatically boolean, which is very strange. At this point, we'll just press V and turn this back to automatic so we get something like this. We'll Shift duplicate it a couple of times in order to just create a kind of crazy bullseye ring, and we'll just duplicate it, move it over. Let's select this end and we'll just right click to fill it, and let's just increase the radius, and we'll just duplicate this one off on the side. Sometimes I do shape studies where I'll just duplicate a shape repeatedly and take it through multiple variations of differences to just compare multiple results. So we're just duplicating this off on the side, just making variable fillets. Let's say we want to modify what we have going on with this. So I'm just going to select all of these and choose subdivide a couple of times, which just goes to show that dealing with curves on a modeling level can sometimes be a little bit annoying, but we're just having some fun with curves, just creating some shapes. We could press Alt X, mirror this one to the other side. However, I'm pretty sure mirror and curves don't actually come through whenever it comes to recall, but let's take all of these curves and we're going to press M and move them to a new collection that we're just calling curves. So now they've been placed there, and you can see the scale that they are. They're pretty much this much when compared to the cube, just to show its size differential. And if we just press 1 to go back to our main collection, we could press D and go inside of the box helper and set our recall collection to something like curves. And if we expand collection, we see that there's now a new option for recall dimension. So if you enable this, it means that whenever you recall a shape, it will be recalled at the exact dimensions that it was drawn in. So let's just use box. We're just going to draw box and just alt scroll. And we see that whenever we alt scroll, we're not really pulling up anything. Let's press D, switch to click the arrow keys. And more than likely, the issue is that it requires that there are meshes whenever it comes to the recalling process. So let's Control A and apply this, and receiving a phone call and ignored. And let's go back to our cube and try doing that again. So we draw our box, and when we alt scroll, we're actually recalling those shapes from the other collection. So I'll have to check into what's going on with curves, because previously it was able to recall them. But in this case, the example has been demonstrated where basically we're now able to recall shapes. And even if you draw the cube very small, whenever I begin clicking through the shapes to begin recalling them, even through the box helper, we see that they're recalled to those dimensions. Of course, I can still press tab, grab this dot, hold shift whenever I drag it in order to keep it all proportional, click and apply, and just like that, we're able to apply this shape without having to go through a whole lot of work dealing with the special X and Y parameters. So let's draw another shape, and we just begin clicking through until we find the one that we want. This one's my favorite. Let's also enable draw dots and play off of this side where we'll draw a center box, and let's just begin clicking, and we see that the shape didn't actually come in utilizing center draw. So there's still work to be done whenever it comes to recall, but just wanted to show that we have been making improvements in regards whenever it comes to recall. And this is one of the first steps, is recalling shapes at absolute dimensions for those cases where you actually need it. So here's something that always drove me crazy previously in Boxcutter. So here we are using an older version. I'm just going to draw a shape with N-gon. And from here, we're just going to begin extruding this out. And if we grab the draw dot and we move this over to the other side, as in we move this draw dot from here to here, what do you expect is going to happen with the middle area? Do you think that this is going to retain in this middle area and this is going to become on the other side? Because if we move it, we see that you are absolutely incorrect. And I've always thought this was weird, how anytime you move the draw dot across itself, the shape remains the same orientation. In fact, if we do it vertically, we see that the shape remains the same, which in a way is an anomaly unto itself, to have the shape perfectly oriented the exact same direction every time you move the draw dot across itself. This is something that just always stuck out with me, and I felt could use a degree of improvement whenever it comes to Boxcutter. So here we are back in the current, and let's press D, jump over to N-gon, and I'm just going to begin drawing a shape. My favorite shape. We'll just right click to cancel, press E. We don't even have to go into extrusion, but now whenever you have the latest version of Boxcutter, when you drag it to the other side, we see that the shape now mirrors. So, you know, in my head, I was like thinking it should be more like Photoshop. If you transform something in Photoshop and you drag one of the edges across itself, it's been pretty ingrained in all of us that it should just flip the shape automatically. So this is something quite new to Boxcutter and affects pretty much all of our shapes. So if we switch over to custom and we just begin drawing the logo, we can grab the draw dot and we see that we're able to now flip the logo to any orientation. For example, on this side, if it's incorrect, we could always just press Shift tilde to rotate it inside until we have it correct. So you still have this degree of versatility whenever it comes to Boxcutter. We'll press Tab to get our draw dots, but if you just need to flip the shape, you're also able to do that. So I feel that more than likely we'll be coming back in the future, adding individual axial flip options to the helper itself for users to be able to do this on the fly. But for now, it's at least something that's behaviorally able to be done. And always keep in mind that just by holding Shift, we can keep this shape 1 to 1. And now we're able to just flip it on its corner, depending on what our anchor point currently is. So this just adds a lot more flexibility to Custom Cutter and N-gon, and pretty much any shape that has a specific setup that you have going with it. And ideally, it should calculate the normals correctly, even when it's flipping on the fly, just like you're seeing. So that way you can just grab it, extrude it, you could hold Control to snap it to depth, click and apply, and we're done. So here I am in a previous version of Boxcutter, and we are under Cut utilizing Box. So if we click and drag, we are able to draw our box, and we see that we're able to freely draw this box. So we can cut wherever we want on this cube. If we want to bring it to the other side and begin cutting just this corner area, we can, and we have absolute flexibility with it. And if we press D and we jump over to Custom Cutter, we see that Custom Cutter also has these same rules, which I refer to as box rules. The ability for Custom Cutter to just be able to be freely drawn out and transformed allows for some really weird and unusual combinations. However, sometimes you want something a little bit more constrained. And for that reason, we have the ability for users to hold Shift in order to scale the cutter to 1 to 1. And then if you want to have custom depth, you can also hold Control during the extrusion process, and it will automatically grab the 1 to 1 depth. However, we're in a version so old that it doesn't actually have that capability yet. But this is Custom Cutter as you've known and loved it, and really I feel that it's always played by box rules. So if we bring up the newer version of Boxcutter 718.11, we could press D, and if we jump to Custom Cutter, there's an option now called Auto Proportions, which I feel is the true form of custom cutters, and we'll be expanding on it from here forward. So there's also an option under Behaviors, where if we collapse behavior and expand shape, we see that there's an option for Auto Proportions, which basically means whenever you draw a custom cutter, you no longer have to hold down Shift or Control in order to get 1 to 1. So you can just draw a shape, perfectly extrude it to the 1 to 1 to 1 proportions of the shape. So I said in the previous video that we were making that change with Shift and Control, that a better system was going to be coming. And first we attempted it with our work with auto depth, but with auto depth we need something that's able to permanently be enabled for Custom Cutter to permanently modify its behavior. So therefore Auto Proportions was born. And whenever I'm talking about auto depth, I'm talking about basically under laser cut we can toggle auto depth, which has an option for custom proportions. So whenever this is enabled, we're able to just draw a shape and it automatically has proportions for both the X and the Y and the Z based on the scale of a single axis that we're drawing on. So this just makes life a lot easier. However, if we switch over to box, this behavior persists where we're now drawing boxes that have automatically calculated depth, which isn't really the best for your general experience. So now you can actually have auto depth just be off, because really you don't want to be modifying all of your cut behaviors. And then under custom, just have auto proportions on, and then whenever you draw a shape, you will just automatically be able to draw in this auto proportion mode. So another thing about it is you see me clicking and dragging and then extruding, and it locks thanks to AccuCut also being affected to take this change in mind. If we click and apply, it's able to complete. However, we don't even have to jump to the laser cut process. We can keep the shape 2D, click, and it will just jump to the 1 to 1 to 1 mode. And so right now I'm just showing it with the simple Boxcutter logo, but even with complex shapes, you can now draw them in very easily and just quickly tab them, press Control R in order to rotate it, press spacebar to apply, and just get that correct depth every time without even having to worry about holding down any additional hotkeys. So this is a pretty major update whenever it comes to Boxcutter. We were going to originally save this for 719, but because of the extension of this event, it's easier to just get users acquainted with this early before we begin progressing. So shape auto proportion, which we were talking about as a thing for custom, would also affect your ability to use the draw dot whenever it comes to N-gon, therefore reducing the amount of keystroke presses in order to get your shape under control. So here we'll just draw my favorite N-gon shape. Once again, we'll press backspace a couple of times to go back a point. double click to bring this shape out, and we see that the notification jumped to box, which means that whenever the shape is paused, it's under box rules. And we see that whenever we grab the draw dot, we're still able to freely transform the shape, and that's because we're under box rules. So custom rules do not yet apply whenever it comes to N-gon, but if we hold shift, we can still get that one-to-one result and scale it proportionally to whatever we need it to be, and then just click and it will just perform its laser cut. But whenever it comes to custom, as long as this behavior is on, it will require that you turn it off in order to get that full power of laser cut. So the goal is to get 1 to 1, so it's absolutely proportional on every single axis, because more often than not, you may not actually want your depth to be just messed up at the very last minute. So deep philosophical questions were asked about whether or not you want to get your cutter just right on the X and Y and then just get all crazy on the Z, which even in this mode, we could always press Alt, which will unlock it and allow us to continue on with the extrude if we want to break the bounds that's locked in by auto proportion. So to demonstrate that again, I'm just drawing the shape, and let's actually make sure auto proportions is enabled. So we draw our shape, we perform our extrusion, it locks us in. We could just tap Alt and it disables it for us to be able to break the conditioning for the Z and get all the way through the shape if needed. And then we see that auto proportion is still enabled. So to discuss the helper, let's create a quick shape. So I'm just going to cut a box and then cut another box, but I'm going to press W, which will turn it into a wedge. And then from here, we're just going to cut a couple of wedges, and I'll use Control in order to snap it into a perfect wedge, just minimizing the amount of clicks. We could press Alt VE just so we're looking at something a little bit better. And I'll press D and jump over to circle, and we're just going to create a quick shape. Press J to turn it into join, bring it over to the other side. We could press D and change our rounds to 32 under circle, or click the quick option for 32 rounds. Let's press tab and grab the draw dot, and we can adjust the size of our circle, and then we can just click and apply. So from here, I'm just going to go back to box, and we're just going to click and drag to cut a shape all the way around this, press Y to make it an extraction, and then we can just click and apply. So that whole process is something that could be done entirely from the helper instead of all the hotkeys I pressed. However, I find it a lot easier to press hotkeys. But our goal with the helper is definitely to minimize the amount of hotkeys used. And so now that we have a shape in our custom buffer, whenever we click and drag it, we can just press tab to pause this shape, and we can press D, and we see that there's now an option in the helper for rotate inside. So you could just rotate your shape inside in the event that you need to rotate your shape 90 degrees, or you could just press Control R. Actually, I was talking about rotate inside, which is Shift R, but Control R will actually shape rotate. So by pressing Control R, we just rotate the shape 90. We see there's also an option inside the helper. Shift R will do rotate inside, which sometimes will get you what you want. Sometimes it will scale the shape in a way oblong to the axis perpendicular to what you want. But for that reason, rotate 90 was added, just in case you need to just truly rotate at 90. Because we have auto proportions enabled, we could just press spacebar, and we see that we're able to get a perfect replica of our last shape. So if we go to custom, we see that custom proportions is enabled, meaning that you can toggle this off and on from the helper now as of this version. And so let us just click and drag to create a shape. We'll just press tab in order to pause it, and let's just rotate this shape inside. And from here, just click and apply. So next thing I want to try is we're just going to draw a box. But before I draw the box, let's press D, and underneath collection, there's an option now for recall dimensions, which means that if you draw a shape and you recall it, it's going to recall at the dimensions that you are recalling it from. So even though this shape is small, it doesn't really matter what shape we drew. We could always just press D, click on the forward and next arrows in order to recall these previous shapes, which this is the shape that we actually want. We'll just click on rotate 90 degrees to rotate it how we want. We could just press G in order to move this shape. And from here, just press spacebar and apply. So just a quick overview of the new options that are available in the new box helper. It was a big point of contingency for me for a moment to decide whether or not I wanted to have shape rotate on the same row, because it does shrink these icons a little bit. However, their importance to the workflow is less important pretty much I keep my origin on initial centered, and the rest of these options really don't matter to me, but these options definitely do because they're integral to the user shape experience. So we can just go in, click on our shape to recall what we need, and it just works. However, let's see what happens whenever we have recall dimensions off. Let's just draw a shape, and we press D and we click, and we see that we're recalling the shapes and they're fitting exactly inside of the bounds, which is definitely a way to work. But if you have a kit of pieces that you want to recall, you probably want to recall them absolutely perfect, so that way you don't have to deal with all this rigmarole. Because at this point, now I have to press shift or have to press tab in order to pause the shape. I have to grab this draw dot in order to go back to my draw proportions, which we see actually automatically corrects it because custom proportions is on. In fact, looking at it from the Z, we see that the Z did not get corrected. So let's grab this dot, and we have to just hold control in order to snap it to its absolute Z, and then we can click and complete the operation.